Professor Robin Wensley, former head of Warwick Business School, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Director of the Advanced Institute of Management Research. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Tell us how you became Dean.
Well, in those days it was relatively simple. You were actually voted in by a majority of the full-time faculty. Technically speaking, which is an interesting aside, the administrative and secretarial staff did not have the right to vote. It was a classic academic process. And one of the things I'd say my predecessor had organised rather well was to ensure that there was a proper ballot and there were a number of candidates. So it was a very old type democratic process, which nowadays we're relatively unused to in most business schools.
And how do you apply your discipline, your marketing and strategy interest to the job?
To some extent, well, in one way quite a lot, because obviously the business side of a business school has a lot of marketing attached to it in those terms. And at the same time, both internally and externally, the issue of crafting a strategy for the school which carries internal commitment yet makes sense externally is a major part of the Dean's role. It should be said that both in marketing and strategy I'm perhaps not completely committed to the orthodox interpretation. So there were interesting discussions sometimes as to how far we actually had a deliberate strategy in Warwick and how far we were sort of making it up as we went along. And of course the truth was somewhere between the two, but there was an onus on the Dean to express and articulate the sort of coherent strategy that people could buy into. So that part of it, it helped to be able to know the language.
So how would you define marketing?
Marketing, particularly in that context, seemed to be a combination, basically, of recognising the fact that, as with many other areas, branding was important, that actually in our core markets, undergraduate as well as postgraduate, what was important was you attach Warwick to the generic title, so the Warwick MBA or whatever. And the other thing I think which was quite important, which was a marketing perspective on it, was actually understanding a bit of the dynamics of demand you were facing. Quite interesting in the business school world as a whole. At that time, a bit easier because in general the characteristic of demand was it was going up. But at the same time there were questions, quite important questions, how you positioned what you did against your competitors and in terms of your balance of the types of student or types of participant you were trying to attract.
And any critical moments in your deanship?
Oh yes, a number really. I suppose some of my colleagues might say rather a lot, but from my point of view, perhaps there are three that are really important. One was, I think, I was going to say any dean, that would be dangerous to say, but I think quite a lot of deans come to a conclusion sometime after they've taken the job that they've let themselves in for more than they realised. And I think one of the key points is what you do when you get to that realisation. I was lucky, I had some good and interesting colleagues, but also committed colleagues at the senior level. So it was really a matter of saying to them, look, I just can't do all this on my own. Can we actually look at a way of organising ourselves as a team? I'm willing to take my responsibilities as, in inverted commas, leader, but I just can't do this all. And I think that was a very crucial time for me, and it was very fortunate. I was very fortunate with the positive response I got. Another tension that arose, and I think arises very often in business schools, is the tension between what you might call teaching and research. And Warwick at that time, and I think probably still, we had a view that you had to, all the faculty had to teach in those terms, and not only that, going on from George's enthusiasm before us for what is called the Warwick Matrix, which was the teaching loan plan, there was very much a view that actually just because you were a senior and established researcher didn't mean to say you took a lower teaching load. And so the corollary of that was that actually you had to say to people running programs, in the final analysis, you can express a preference for who you want to do it, but you'll sort of get who you're given. Now, obviously, you did your best not to put them into an untenable position, but that was and dealing with that on an ongoing basis, and sometimes with key meetings, was quite a challenge.
Mm. And how did you manage meetings? What's your style?
Difficult. I mean, in general, I probably suffer from the fact that I actually think, generally speaking, other people's views around the table are more interesting than mine. Mm. So I have a tendency to let them talk. And I think over the years I've learnt a bit more about time management in those terms. I don't think our committee meetings, even the big ones, ran desperately beyond time, but certainly I think when I started as Dean I had a tendency to let things run for longer than I should, and I think I've learnt over the years to speed things up a bit, or at least to recognise when we're not getting much more out of the discussion.
And dealing with your own energy management, what energised you in the role?
Oh, well, I suppose if I'm honest, I'd say the thing that energised me most was the opportunity to discuss and engage with others about their ideas, their thoughts, their interests. Rather similar to what I've just said. I mean, I found that I'm really often rather more interested in what they're researching than I'm researching. And that means that, to be quite honest, things like faculty seminars were really exciting and interesting. We got good people. They talked about interesting things, and that gave me, encouraged me a lot to go on doing the other things I was doing. It also the what you might call the business side of the business school at that time. Although there were blips, it was doing pretty well, and obviously you get positive reinforcement in those terms if actually on the more commercial set of activities, generally speaking, what you're doing is paying off, and that's good as well. That's sort of energising too.
And the relationship with the Central University, any thoughts?
It was interesting because we've gone, I mean, since then, as with many other business schools, the relationship with the centre has become more arm's length, I suppose. And I was actually, post my deanship, I was quite keen at Warwick on and involved in the negotiations about us becoming more arm's length. Now, with the advantage of hindsight, I'm not sure it's quite such a good thing to have as we thought it was at the time. So looking back at my time, when we were much more integrated, I think it required you to argue your case to a different community. You had to persuade a group of senior peers who were not part of the university, as part of the business school, but part of the university, that they should, allow you to advertise more posts and all those sort of things. With the advantage of hindsight, I'm not sure that they actually were very unreasonable about that. At the time, it felt like it was an unnecessary bureaucratic procedure. Actually, I'm not sure it turned out to demand very much more time and commitment than the arm's length arrangements that a number of schools now have, because they still find in one way or another they have to negotiate with the centre. At least in this case, it was very clear that you did have to, so you got on and did it properly in those terms, I think.
Okay. Finally, Robin, what are your views on management research in business schools today?
A good question, because it sort of seems to me to be a lively question in almost all business schools I'm aware of. And of course, running AIM, I encounter quite a lot of issues around quality and impact of management research as well. I suppose my overall view is that in at least most business schools, and Warwick certainly would be one of them, I believe that anybody who is actually teaching at any level should be also informed in a scholarly manner, if I can use that term. In other words, they should be aware of their subject developments, they should be aware of recent research in their field, they should be incorporating that in what they teach, and they might well be also incorporating in what they write about, even if it's things like lecture notes for their students. Where I think we have to be a bit more careful is when we move from that level of scholarliness to primary research, and in particular the reporting on that primary research in what are quite clearly very academic journals. And there I think one has to take a portfolio approach. One has to say there are various ways in which you can both build on your own research and build on other people's research, and there are various audiences you can communicate that to. And the sort of totemic 4-star journal is one of those ways, and for certain groups of academics a very important way, and should be one they're encouraged, nay required to do. But that's a big jump from expecting all of the members of an academic faculty, even of a research-led school, to meet that criteria exclusively in those terms. So from my point of view, it's more a matter of saying that debate about the research in your area and what impact and what's changing should be one you're actively engaged in, but you can engage in it in various ways in various media in those terms. And probably most important for a dean is to ensure that there's a portfolio rather than a single criterion.
That's great, thank you.